Hello from Ops Nation. My name is Simon Rodriguez. I'm going to be moderating the panel today. I'm a member of Ops Nation and Ops Nation's new head of storytelling. For those of you who've been following the COO Survival Guide online, I've been editing that in the background. And today I have the pleasure of introducing our webinar on go-to-market ops and execution with two people who are not only just members of the community and part of the startup space, but people that I've actually worked with and know personally, and hopefully can consider friends, Christian and Jeff, in addition to being colleagues. So let me talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today, and then I'll introduce our panelists and get it over to them so they can deliver all the good stuff for you. So today we're going to be talking about go-to-market ops as the foundation, not just for profitable growth, but as you can see, for predictable growth. And so as all of you are probably feeling, we've got a lot of startup operators in the room. I think pretty much everyone is. We're halfway through 2023, which has been a challenging year. Venture-backed companies, particularly SaaS companies, have been in a uniquely challenging spot to pivot from this sort of old 2017 grow at all costs mindset to something more predictable, sustainable, and profitably growing. So the question today is, how can go-to-market, so the sales function and customer success functions, align around a shared vision? And so today we've got, again, two people who are experts in this space that are going to walk us through a load of great information on this. And I'll start with Jeff. So Jeff Courtney has been working in financial services for many, many years and has deep experiences in both high growth and transformation environments. He himself has been a COO, both in sales and risk functions at banks, as well as venture-backed FinTechs. He's the guru when it comes to building, scaling, and transforming operations teams. And he's done it from everything from super early stage teams of 10 all the way up to groups in the thousands. And working with him today to present is Christian, who is also an accomplished SaaS go-to-market executive. And he's worked in similar areas across sales, marketing, ops, and product management. He's built successful go-to-market sales and marketing strategies. He's led growth programs and product launches, and he's also hit some quite ambitious revenue goals at companies all the way from pure startup to scale up and enterprise stages. So Jeff, Christian, thanks for joining us today. Jeff, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Simon. I'm excited to be here today. As Simon said, we've worked together, actually the three of us. Some of the slides here come from a project we did together in one place. Christian and I have known each other for many years and worked on a number of projects together. So a lot of what we want to share today comes from that experience. Hopefully it's useful. We've tried to synthesize it into a couple of frameworks and methodologies, and look forward to your questions. We'll probably stop at 2 or 3 points throughout. And if there are any questions, just pop them in the chat. Simon will gather that, synthesize, and facilitate that way. So what do we want to talk about today specifically? So the people often say that a startup or being in growth mode can feel like jumping off a cliff and building the plane on the way down. I think that's true. And that sounds sort of very adrenaline intensive and frightening and scary and fun. We believe there are also ways to do that, to find the right patterns, to do that in a consistent way, to do that effectively. And as these gentlemen on the screen seem to be feeling, do that in a way that you're pretty confident you're going to be able to get to your destination. So that's, I think, a pretty good segue into go-to-market ops, because I think go-to-market ops probably feels like that sometimes the most of any part of the business. So today we're going to talk about what is go-to-market ops, why it's important today, and why there's more to it than just profitability. We're going to talk about alignment as the key to go-to-market ops, and we're going to unpack a methodology to get there. Then we're going to talk about go-to-market ops as it evolves with the business. Businesses grow, they're never static, the market changes. How can go-to-market ops adapt to that? And we'll dive into a few examples and talk about a maturity template to try and flesh that out. So go-to-market ops, I guess the first thing is to say we come at this from a SaaS perspective, but we think these principles and approaches are relevant to non-SaaS businesses. And just very specifically in go-to-market ops, we're thinking sales, marketing, customer success, but you'll see we'll also talk about some of the other teams around that. At product market fit, so when you are exploring the market, you want to confirm that what you have to offer, there's demand for it, and not just demand, but actually that your clients they almost couldn't live without what you're offering, and therefore they're willing to pay for it. You get that feeling of product market fit. At that point, go-to-market ops, a lot of time it's just about instrumenting the business, connecting the pieces to make it as simple as possible to do that exploration efficiently. As you start to find a product market fit and you want to get go-to-market fit, that's a repeatable sales motion, a repeatable set of steps aligned across the business. That sense of focus and alignment is critical. You're probably hiring in more people, your teams are growing, so there's a risk of silos. And at the same time, you've been at it now for probably a couple of years, markets change. And so you've got to adapt to multiple things. Maintaining that alignment and focus is a critical part of go-to-market ops in that second fit stage. And as you nail that, then you start to think about scaling. So you expand across geographies, channels, markets, and you're looking at that durable enterprise value, looking at your unit economics on a long-term scale, and how do you build something really sustainable? Again, there's no way I think you can achieve that without a great go-to-market ops function. So it's relevant at each stage. It's slightly different at each stage. And in speaking to a couple of people, particularly in the scale space, in businesses that are $50 million plus, even at some points when you're mature, you go back and revisit some core concepts around product market fit or you go to market, and there's constant tweaking and iteration across these stages. However, the thing that we think is constant across every single stage, and the one sort of golden thread through go-to-market ops, is that it's always about anticipating and managing friction effectively. That friction can come from a whole bunch of places, as we've seen, but it's always about anticipating and managing friction effectively.
Great kind of cap off there, Jeff, and agreed, right? This is really about kind of stage of where you are, what you aim to achieve, and building a predictable playbook, which we'll get into a little bit further. Well, let's kind of take a look at where we are today, right? The world is changing. We all know this. We're in significant financial and economic shift times, global macroeconomic factors playing in. 2023 is playing out much differently than the last 5 years. And if you look at this chart, which is a brilliant chart put together by Tom Tungus, a VC based in Silicon Valley, who's correlated interest rates to early stage venture funding. And while there are many factors and there are many implications and reasons why funding is down this year, it is interesting to point out and look at the significant amount of funding in the last 5 years and how they've correlated to low interest rates. And the changes in the last 12 to 18 months have really driven a change in available capital. So in 2023 is beginning to look a lot more like 2008, the beginning of the financial crisis, the recession. So what that means is there's just money is tighter than it's been in 5 years. And what we've become accustomed to with capital, both as SaaS tech startup and scale up people, as well as large enterprises to whom we sell, the availability of capital is much different. The primary implication to that really is that tech buying has changed, right? These new constraints are introducing factors to people who are purchasing software, whether it's low end, low value infrastructure tooling or super high valuable enterprise applications. That's changed quite significantly. Not to mention the fact that investors now have a different view in 2023 than they did even just 12 months ago. So they're beginning to value predictability amidst this uncertainty of what comes next. Therefore, our call to action as operators, as people who are managing, running, and responsible and collaborating with others across our teams within the go-to-market space, to do more with less and also be more disciplined about it. The last 5 years, there's a quote I heard recently, the last 10 years have been about freewheeling, and the next 10 years are going to be about discipline. And so we believe that these external factors are really beginning to play out and affect how we view our internal operations, particularly with sales, marketing, CS, and revenue operations, which ultimately, as Jeff mentioned before, is beginning to surface some friction, right? Friction within our funnel that is creating a lot of issues. And those issues were covered up previously because we had such great growth that came relatively easily because of the changes that have happened over the last 5 years. So I'm going to step through just a few examples of what this GTM debt, as we like to call it, Analogous to technical debt, right? If you're in a software engineering space, technical debt is built up over a matter of time. So there are a lot of things that contribute to this GTM debt and really the friction that takes place across the funnel, both from a data perspective as well as your teams. And first one out of the gate is spray and pray, right? Kind of the spray and pray approach to, getting your message out and finding your audience is very low return, right? If you do the analysis on that, it really becomes a painful exercise if there's not specificity to it. So the question is really, who is the right solution or the right candidate for your solution? Second one here, disjointed buyer and seller journeys. So what's the experience that our internal teams have in marketing to and selling to a target audience? And what's the experience that those buyers have? And are they in sync? And how many steps, how many clicks, how many interactions does it take? Again, it goes back to, it depends on what stage you're at, as Jeff pointed out before. But that's super important. It introduces potentially pitfalls throughout the journey. One example of that is what I like to call quote to cash thrash, right? So if you have a qualified opportunity, you're ready to send a proposal, you want to put together a quote, and you put together pricing and packaging, well, that can be a very fragmented process if it's been DIY. So that's just a piece of confusion and friction in the collaboration process as you go. And once that deal is closed, how do you hand off from the AE to the CSM? How long is that time to value from when the solution is delivered to when its value is realized by that customer? And so critical handoffs that maybe were, again, speed was of the essence, grow at all costs. Now it takes a much more thoughtful process to that, because guess what? That client you just landed and those dollars you just booked or that revenue you just booked now becomes more valuable to hang on to. And depending on whether you're MRR business, ARR business, that next renewal cycle may be short or long. And of course, everybody suffers from what's the latest version, right? Whether it's a sales deck, whether it's a product spec, whether it's a contract even, right? Onboarding docs, et cetera. Having the most recent, the best, the most clear version is of utter importance. And then the last one of my favorites here is what I call toolitis, right? The acquisition of too many MarTech and sales tech tools, which were purchased and implemented for a reason. But with too many of them, right, what that can lead to is unclear data pipelines, right? That results in maybe untrusted data, maybe untrusted forecasts, maybe unreliable revenue reports. And so if marketing and sales and finance and other functions can't rely on a single source of truth, that can create a lot of problems and a lot of really slowing things down within that cycle. So those are just 6. There are many others, and probably ones that you all have experienced. But we'll pause there for if there are any questions, Simon.
So no questions in the chat from the audience. If anyone has one, feel free to drop them in. But I just had one quick question to maybe tease something out, because on a previous slide, I'll jump to Al Ward's question actually. What examples of do-it-yourself quote to cash thrash are there? I'll direct that to you, Christian.
Price books. Yeah, no, great question, Al. Price books, right? So versions of a price book, if there is a price book. Again, there's like folklore playbooks that have existed and grown up in companies, particularly from earlier stages, that are growing, right? So a rep maybe who had their own version of pricing, their own version of discounting, a particular deal they did something custom for, further back is being reused. So that's just an example of potentially a kind of a do-it-yourself, where there's not been a standardized approach or process to pricing and packaging. Great question.
Great, thanks, Christian. And one question that I had is, I think we have many professionals in the startup space who often have purview, especially if they're COOs, over both some of the commercial function and some links to the product side as well. And we mentioned product market fit. How is it in these situations that you can try to diagnose whether your problem, if you have some sort of a scaling or predictability problem, is on the product market fit side or on the go-to-market side? And to what extent is there overlap between those two?
Yeah, good question. I'll give you or Jeff, if did you have something or?
Go for it.
Yeah. I think two quick diagnostics for me on product market fit is number one, to the customers you acquired, would they be upset if you went out of business? Would they yell and scream and pound the table if the business no longer exists, right? If your solution were not in place, that's kind of it's a feeling, it's an intuitive thing, it's maybe a personal relationship thing as well. And number two is just around the data. What does the data tell you? Do you have cohorts of customers who are acquired at certain price points who are retained? Or is there churn effects and so forth that might tell you, hey, this seemed like a good idea, but the real value, the real impact of the product or solution hasn't been achieved. So that may tell you that product market fit is not quite dialed in from a utility perspective.
Yeah. One from my perspective, one experience was where I think we had pretty good product market fit with one particular segment of the market. We were pretty predictable in terms of how we would sell to them. We could get the price. We saw the demand. When we had inbound, the conversion rates were very high. It was very clear that when we found the right sort of segment, they usually, more often than not, would buy our solution, and we could beat out other competitors. The issue is when we were selling to them, we couldn't translate that selling motion to other segments. And I used to joke that we had product market fit. We just weren't always sure which product and which market. I think sometimes you've got to really balance between those two things: your selling motion, your product fit. You might be at different stages, but based on the segment, which kind of tees up the next sort of section that we wanted to talk about as well. One thing that from what Christian was saying there, the world's changing, and we all know that. If you think the future or the near-term future looks a lot like the past, then it's relatively easy to be prescriptive and take a playbook of something you've done before and just apply it to the future. But if you're pretty confident the future is not going to look like the past, then methodology and first principles become even more important. So we wanted to walk through a methodology and an approach we developed. And actually, this is where the three of us, with Christian, Simon, myself, we worked together on this in one business, found it really useful, and they still use this today, a couple of years later. We call it a reflexive methodology because, again, you have to go and iterate around it. It's not static. It's not sequential. Clearly, when you're starting something, you kind of want to establish the vision. Who do we want to be when we grow up? What are we building? And you flesh that out. We're not going to talk about that a lot today. On the strategy side, we wanted to simplify and say, look, there's two main components: your target market and your business model. Consumption or licensing fees or whatever it is in SaaS. We're not going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to focus on the target market. And then the next step is, what are the growth pillars? What are those things that you do, that you have, that you offer, that really help you distinguish yourself and compete in the market, that really provide a unique value to your clients? And after that, well, great. You've got your target market, you've got your vision, you've got the value you provide. How do you actually execute? What are the people, process, systems, data, the cadence, the plans, the different sort of support functions? How do they all work together to execute and actually deliver the value you think you have for the market? And then finally, what I think is perhaps the most important piece is the golden thread. What is the narrative? What is the story that brings all of that together? Because if one of the core things that we're working against is friction, one of the core sources of friction is having people with different views, different perspectives, different mental models of the business. So if you can get people aligned on that big picture mental model, the components and how they fit into that, that's a big step towards reducing friction. You get people rowing in the same direction. Having that narrative crisp for your colleagues, for the market, and for your investors, and all that aligned, it just will make your life so much easier when it comes to joining things up as you move into execution. So we're going to go through and unpack this step by step a little bit. The first thing to say is, start with a target market in terms of where you want to focus, and start by defining and thinking through your options, not just what's coming in through your inbound channels, but actually, what are your options? Who could you serve in the market? We found it really useful to lay that out on a continuum. Be creative. we probably ended up with this particular exercise we ended up with 5 vectors, we called them, but we went through at least 30, thinking through all of those options, and then choose, and then select where you want to play and select where you don't want to play. So for one example, there was a good article recently in the Generalist around Brex, big fintech in the US. They got traction, sort of kicked off, I think, with the startup community. Turned out the enterprises, larger enterprises, valued what they offered. And then the SME, SMBs, so the small and medium-sized businesses, really piled in, and they found themselves stretched so that from a product and an operation and a value delivery perspective, they couldn't serve all of those segments well. And they made a decision, stepped away from the middle and serve the top-end enterprise and the bottom-end tech startup, which then ended up propelling the next stage of their growth.
And as you play that through, right, if we look at the growth pillars as we laid out in the previous diagram, we have implications, right? So choices have implications. As Jeff said, you definitely want to look at all the options and understand what's available for what could be possible, but then choose and be very specific and understand that many of these do have implications to decisions downstream. And of course, having an ambition, spotting a problem, getting traction, finding product market fit means that you've diagnosed a particular segment with a particular product. But that product can take a number of different forms and it can't evolve. So making the choice over building an application that could be a single purpose-built function, like maybe an expense report or expense management application, versus a more broad business enterprise solution like CRM or ERP, or potentially a platform, right? If you think about Salesforce and their Force.com platform, there's an entire economy built around companies building apps on the Salesforce platform, building solutions on the Salesforce platform. And that's going to have knock-on effects to your marketing, right? So choosing enterprise, choosing to develop a purpose-built solution for specific use cases mean that you most likely want to choose an account-based marketing approach to be very specific with your marketing mix and your marketing spend for who you go after and what your conversion rates are going to be. And making choices around doing customer marketing are going to be equally as valuable, turning those customers into advocates and those advocates into promoters for you as well. So that's some of the implications for marketing. And then as you go through the sales options, right, sales channels, sales methods, it's unlikely to take a product-led approach with an enterprise solution. It's more likely to be sales-led, to find channel partners to help distribute that solution, and to build alliances with others in the ecosystem. As many of us know, right, it's about ecosystems now. We have very few kind of catch-all technology solutions out there. So it's important to build alliances, to build complementary solutions around that. And so again, there are kind of implications to each one of these decisions that gets made. And then finally around customer success, right? And again, going after a particular market where you're not going to have end user support managed for renewals per se. So building an account management capability to focus on renewals and the ability to upsell and expansion motions, et cetera, is another key one here. And as Jeff said, there are a number of kind of vectors to pull and ways to go, but we've kind of just simplified this down for today's discussion to lay out the implications and what it means then to operationalize some of these decisions.
Actually, Chris, if you go back 1 second, just in terms of how we executed this, it probably, from memory, took us about 4 to 6 weeks of not full-time effort. In that context, I was the COO, so I was able to sort of marshal things and mobilize things a little bit. It was extremely helpful in working through those 30 vectors, those 30 options, to have Christian and Simon involved, because the debate there that they created gave me an outside-in perspective, which was super helpful. And we, as we whittle it down to the top 5, I was able to then take that to the broader management team with their help, and then walk the management team through this. And essentially, in I think it was half a day, we were able to make those key decisions. So about 4 to 6 weeks of prep, having that critical friend kind of debate, we were able to reach these conclusions in about half a day. To give you a sense of the factors that influence and were helpful in executing around this. So then moving into the specific implementation and the orchestration or operationalization. So once you choose your target market, once you've got the growth pillars aligned for that previous slide, the next critical bit is operationalizing, right? This comes back to the foundations. So this is essentially, I think, really the heart of ops, the heart of COO world, which is connecting teams and bridging silos. Because as you grow and as you're bringing new people in, everybody's got their view, everybody's got their priority, everybody's got their challenges and opportunities. It's the connectivity across all of those that's going to really determine how well you execute or don't, and how well you manage that friction in the day-to-day execution. So these points, I think they're pretty obvious points in a way, good things to do in any sort of CEO type of world. It's how they align to the previous steps that we've been talking about. I'll call out three as the ones I thought were most critical in about any piece of work I've done in this domain. The communication alignment. So how do you make sure you've got a consistent message to the market externally around what your business is and who you are and the product or the service that you provide? From the first sort of marketing touch point all the way to renewal, how do you ensure that consistency of the messaging? And then internally, simple things like the right definitions, making sure you've got the right consistency and feedback loops. Everybody understands the vision. Probably one of the more boring things and things that I think are undervalued relative to the impact they can have is just simply mapping out and automating some of the key steps of the process. That can be the buyer user journey where things are easily tangled, or the internal business management piece where you bring in maybe something around product or finance or legal. Having those things mapped out will slow you down for the weeks or months that you take to map it out, but it will increase your speed and increase your ability to manage change and friction, potentially even for years afterwards, because you've got a good foundation. And then the tooling. So, Christian talked about toolitis and declogging. You might be surprised at how much value you can get by being really, really, really specific about the tools you need, the tools you don't, and what is the data the minimum amount of data you need. Because if you get inundated with these things, they're very quickly going to start causing confusion and clogging the system.
Yeah, great. I think one other point I just kind of tie all this into that we mentioned earlier is just discipline, and having a disciplined approach to executing against all these things that Jeff just mentioned. And that cadence of deadlines is really pretty critical.
Yep.
Absolutely. So we had a question come through one slide back, actually, when you were discussing Brex, Jeff, and how they made that choice to step back from certain markets because they couldn't service them well. And this question was sort of noting that was a brave and wise decision. Do you have any examples of how the ops function can support this type of decision making? And for example, are there any key data points or metrics that are likely to be used to help influence whether or not you should make one of these decisions to either double down or step back? And this person this anonymous person said, I assume CAC payback is probably a good metric, but would love to hear what you think about that metric and any others.
Yeah, so let me just give a couple top of mind observations. Understanding the buyer journey and all of the proof points that they need, and then all of the operational implications for those, I think is a way for ops to be able to articulate and quantify what it means to go after that segment. So you might say, hey, to use the previous example, enterprise, that's going to usually be a 6 to 9 month sales cycle. The tech side, that's going to be a 3-month sales cycle. Well, great, that's fine. That's, one is 9, one is 3, so it's 3 times longer. But that doesn't tell you how much work, or in my own language, how many calories, how many proof points, how many processes, how many things that are different, how many documents, how many meetings, what that buyer journey is like, and how much is required to operationalize and execute on it. And then afterwards, on the consumption side, how much additional support is required. So trying to gauge how many people do you actually need to be able to, one, penetrate that segment and then service it well from an ops perspective. I think it should be relatively easy to quantify, at least in kind of an 80-20 perspective. And then obviously you've got your payback period. I think payback is probably, in my opinion, one of the better metrics to answer that question. yeah, we'll stop there.
I would just add, gross retention numbers. So if you've got folks who don't renew, if you have a segment of the customer base that does not renew consistently, and looking at the cohorts based on what version of the product maybe that was delivered, that would be a super big indicator in addition to CAC payback.
Yep. One of the things that I try to think through quite a bit is kind of to Christian's point, but also land and expand. So let's say we can get into this segment, and it's big, medium, or small. It takes long, it takes less. Fine, that's one analysis. But then on a 1, 2, 3 year horizon, it's an economy of scope question. How many new or different things could we offer to this segment? And how far is that going to stretch us? So from our current product, one thing we worked quite a bit at one business I was in is how easy is it to extend that product to offer something that's new and different and valuable, or how much fresh build do we have to go through, and implementation and operationalization do we have to go through to add something new to that segment? So how easy is it to land and expand from an operations perspective? I think is another interesting thing to consider.
Mm-hmm. One other that just kind of triggered the thought, Jeff, that we think about it a lot in terms of product market fit, which is the stage we talked about earlier. Sometimes making those decisions about market segments, i.e. enterprise, has little to do with product and more to do with process and expectations of large enterprises, compliance requirements, procurement requirements. There are things related to the process that have implications, not just to the product, but to the business, and require more investment, require more people, so on and so forth, to do SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO certifications. A lot of big companies now won't even have a discussion if you don't have some of those compliance certifications. So that could be an element too, if you're in the financial services space, or even different, more stringent requirements around certain data types and so forth. Just another example. Yep. Great question though.
Great.
All right. What are you, Christian?
Yeah. So, wouldn't it be nice if we could just plug in our revenue target, hit autopilot and set off and have it take us there, but the reality is that just doesn't happen, right? So it ends up looking more like this, where we have multiple directions we can go on the way towards that destination. And we're really discovering it. A lot of it is a learning and discovery process and understanding what is working and what's not working. And it is helpful to build a playbook. We, as Jeff mentioned earlier, repeating the same one is often errant. Guilty as charged. I've done that. Got the T-shirt. But that is not the best approach. But having a framework to do that is helpful, knowing what to operationalize currently and anticipating what's next. And this chart is one that we put together, not to be prescriptive, but to be reflective and used and adapted to whatever stage and condition there may be. And thinking about, again, where are you in the journey? And then what's the level of complexity required to go achieve certain things like messaging, having a repeatable messaging playbook for the entire marketing, sales, CS organization. But if you're at the super early stage, you really just need spreadsheets and a web form. You don't need complex marketing automation or CRM necessarily. Things have gotten a lot cheaper, so it's easier to acquire those tools even for free. And then as you move through the journey, in that Series A type of land, building a revenue plan and an expense plan that is really well calibrated to what your pricing model is, to what your growth rates are, in the bit of history that you do have, and setting yourself up for decision-making opportunities. Is our customer acquisition cost growing? Is our payback period expanding? Is it shrinking? Looking at some of the metrics around revenue to make those decisions about the next step. And as you move forward, again, pricing and packaging, talked about quote to cash thrash and some of those issues. Pricing evolves as we learn more about our market and our customers. We begin to get a better understanding of what they want, how they want it. And so we can package it into better components for them, and then operationalize that. One other comment, or I guess I'll make two other comments here, and Jeff, you can comment on it as well. But in my experience, sales enablement and training is such a critical factor. Even if you've nailed who your ideal customer profiles are, who your target personas, both buyer and user. And what that messaging is, getting it into the hands in a repeatable form and drilling, coaching, doing repetitive training along some of that material will just increase your likelihood of success, which translates to shorter sales cycles, higher ACVs, better job satisfaction, employee satisfaction as well, right? People who have success and win feel much better about it. So just touching on a couple of points here. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing on enablement training. So here it's kind of in the middle. In one business where I was, it was a very technical product. We were selling to very technical audience. And so we actually took enablement training and made it a priority much earlier because we were hiring in people for, we were hiring for attitude and for, the ability to sell. We were also working to simplify the product, but we recognized that we really needed to put a lot more effort than we had previously into the enablement because it was such a technical piece. If your solution and if what you're offering is made less technical, maybe you need less enablement training or different type, but you can choose where it goes based on the need of your business and the market.
I'll touch on.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna one other caught my eye that relates to some of the toolitis and the data pipeline issues is marketing attribution. Right, everybody, we all want marketing attribution. We want to know where do good leads come from. Having experienced, the acquisition of a tool to tell us that previously, which really surfaced, this goes back to the surfacing the GTM data, really surfaced the fact that we did not know where our best data was. And so any attribution that we put into that tool was largely ineffective at the moment. We were able to fix it, rectify it, and further leverage it. But a lot of maturity is required before really buying sophisticated tools that are purpose-built for a big job. And that's one example again of one that you can do earlier, but beware and know that you've got to have the right data plumbing in place.
Yep. One learning from me and relevant to this chart as well is I think when Chris and I worked on this, maybe put it together in 3, 4, 5 days. Not full time, working on it here and there, but it's not easy to think this through. But once you get into it, maybe take us 3, 4, 5 days. I can easily add up. I've probably taken 3, 4, 5 months of debating with leadership teams or other teams in different businesses what was most important to do next, what we could do next, and the amount of time we've spent talking through, but not, as we talked about earlier, putting all the options on the table, trying to come up with a sense of what choices we want to make now, what choices we can make later, and getting everybody comfortable in that process. So using this tool, not just to make the decisions, but to get that sense of consensus and common understanding around the table would have saved me a massive amount of time and pain. So I highly recommend this kind of exercise for your business, even if it's just to limit and sort of contrast what kind of choices you want to make now and what kind of choices you want to make a little bit later. Based on what's unique to you.
Very good.
Yep. Okay.
So moving through here, and Simon, certainly grab us, and I think we need to move along a little bit more quickly here. So Jeff and I did want to take just some of these stories which we've been peppering in here and there, and we'll move through these a little bit quickly, just given the time of where we are. But the first one here is right people, right seat. This idea of getting the right folks with attitude, aptitude, and motivation into that right place. And this is kind of an outcome. One, it's an idea from Jim Collins he wrote about in Good to Great, which I highly recommend. But encountered this in a company I was working with who was transforming from a single funnel and a single team into 5 different funnels and 5 different teams to service 5 different market segments. So back to the target market, they're really 5 different ways to sell, 5 different types of ways people wanted to buy. So specializing in each of those areas was really important to get teams and people who are equipped and trained and have the tools to prosecute the sales cycle, to prosecute the marketing campaigns with the right message, the right offer, the right opportunity qualification, and the right proposal. And so what we saw was when we did this, and we were able to kind of affect some of those metric-based changes of sales cycles, ACV went up significantly when we were able to have folks specialize with one particular sales channel versus the other. And at the same time, we left room for a couple of folks who were very good generalists, right? General purpose problem solvers who could be agile, who knew how to be resourceful, and working with a less mature go-to-market segment. So it takes both, right? And it's just part of a feeling out and understanding what you need and when you need it. The other kind of key idea here is using, back to operationalizing GTM Ops, is taking an event, a point in time, as a rallying cry for everybody to come together and to rally and to deliver against that. Quick example was at a large publicly traded software company, and we had acquired 5 companies over 2 years, and we're rolling out a new solution, rebranded, et cetera. And that was it was a massive effort by folks across marketing to work on branding, to work on product naming, folks in finance to look at pricing and packaging, and obviously product and sales, right? To get customers there, to educate them and bring them to where the future was going to be, to where this company was going on its journey, particularly within the IoT space at the time. So that event, and I've had a number of other examples, product launch could be one too, are great point in time activities or events that can really rally folks around and synthesize a lot of these key points that you need to put together for effective go-to-market motions.
Yep. So picking up on that, I was in a business, we brought in a new sales lead, new marketing person, a new ops person, and picked up on the event-driven collaboration piece and worked really intensely for about 6 weeks to crash together a bunch of spreadsheets, bits and pieces of 2 different CRMs, and then just a ton of information in people's heads, try to get one CRM. And we took it a step further, and it was a difficult decision because there's a lot of other things to do, but we ended up mapping out end to end all of the marketing, the MarTech, as Christian was talking about, the toolitis and all that, the marketing, the data, the CRM, all of the sales, everything that we were doing, we mapped it out, wrote down the definitions and the process, and it ended up being an extraordinary foundation. Later on, as we brought in more salespeople, you could see the onboarding time wasn't necessarily twice as fast, but if someone would take 6 months to get up to speed, it would now take them maybe 4 months to get up to speed. We had a new head of sales come in. There's a whole foundation. We had the debates on definitions that were already documented. The definitions were understood within the context of their process. He wanted to change, different things, to reflect what he was used to. That process in otherwise might have taken many months. It took a couple of weeks, maybe 2 weeks to go through because we had that foundation. And then we were just able to declutter and get rid of and turn things off and save money. And ultimately, we were able to automate a couple of things and understand specifically where we needed to automate, so that we saved 2 days a week worth of salesperson's time. So just writing that down and going slow at first to take the time to write things down sped up a whole bunch of other things. Then the final one, just over communication. I think communication is probably the single thing you can do, the single one thing that will most improve go-to-market ops. I remember in one business that was before COVID, we were all remote. We had people East Coast, West Coast, US, and across Europe. And when we met up for a face-to-face, the energy, the motivation, the excitement, the focus, everything was great for about the first 6 to 8 weeks afterwards. But then we didn't have the right frequency of communication, so that when we would get to a QBR, a quarterly business review, we'd end up talking about process stuff or definition stuff or clarifying things rather than actually reviewing the business. And we just missed that frequency of communication and that clarity of communication in the day-to-day, and it built up and it slowed the business down unnecessarily. So those are just some of the examples that we've kind of lived through, some of the experiences that you can't quite categorize in a nice little framework. We hope this has been helpful, and we think we found it helpful. A lot of mistakes and learnings got into this, and I guess we wish you all good luck in terms of trying to find how to apply this to your own business, to your roles, to your teams, as you go forward.
Great. Thanks very much, Christian and Jeff. We've got some comments coming through. A big ol' thanks from Anna, another thanks from Molly. Loads of demand in the chat to have access to the slides as well. So I think, Jeff, you said we'd be able to share the slides. That's fantastic. We'll now open up in the last 10 minutes or so for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A section on Zoom. Just one question I had for you, Christian and Jeff, to while if anyone's thinking they can type them out, is you spoke about some of the pitfalls of knowing when you have go-to-market friction. But as you're going through the process of building a go-to-market playbook, what do you think are some of the real common areas or pitfalls in which that process can start to get derailed, and how might some of the people in the chat be able to navigate around those?
In terms of building, you're saying building your go-to-market plan, essentially, Simon? Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. If we were to follow the instructions that you guys gave for building that out, how might that process get derailed if you're trying to bring, you know, let's say a group of 5 senior leaders in a startup or scale up along that journey?
Right. I think it kind of goes back to a bit of the beginning, right? Ambition, vision. Who do we want to be when we grow up? It's often a question I first ask when I speak with folks in new companies, is really where do folks want to go, right? Is it an IPO? Is it a exit to a PE firm? Is it an acquisition by another tech operation, et cetera, or is it the play to be a long-term, durable, profitable business, which is amazing if you can get to that. So it really starts there, and the things that will derail that really is, I think, a misunderstanding of where the destination is across that leadership team. There's I think Patrick Lencioni wrote about one of his leadership books, a team of one, right? And that executive leadership team really having a synthesized view. I know this is kind of high level kind of comments about pitfalls, but that's where it starts, right? And I think everything kind of falls out from there. That marketing leader, sales leader, CS leader, operations leader, right, really are rallied around what the vision and what the goal is. And number 2, I'd say the real kind of tactical or pragmatic pitfall or confusion point is the data, right? Build the plans based on historical data if you have it. Build it on market data if you can get it. That's an easy way to kind of diffuse, discuss, differentiation or debate or friction in that process. It's really going back to the data.
So I'll reframe the question slightly, from derail your go-to-market plans to actually, slow down or put friction or clog up your go-to-market plans. I think the most consistent issue I've seen is that it's both a positive and negative. You need people with different skill sets, and you need some people going to be a little bit more analytical. They're going to plan, they're going to think, they're going to, and then you need people who just execute, right? And it's getting the balance between that, because you'll get the people who want to execute who just rush off, and you get people who want to plan and sit there and think all day. And it's being able to iterate between those, because that's how you learn. So one of the most important things that we all know is how fast can you learn in an organization when things change. So one of the underlying implications of the stuff we've been talking about is it's a way to iterate between thinking and executing in bite-sized chunks that hopefully satisfies some of the natural DNA and the different personalities you might have around the table, and you get into that good rhythm as a team.
Great. So we've got a similar question that's just come through, which I think many can probably relate with, particularly in startups. The question is, when there's misalignment on a number of axes, whether that's the executive team and product being misaligned, whether that's about conflicting sales channels, etc., how can we think about seeing as the key way to make that dysfunction evident to the leadership team, and I'm assuming to trying to fix some of that?
That's a profound insight, Anonymous, and a great question that I think is endemic to so many early stage companies, and even later stage companies. Shoot, I was in a extremely large company where the same thing would happen periodically. But I think anecdotes, just like Jeff and I have tried to kind of infuse some personal experiences and insights, specific examples. I think that's the thing, is what are the specific examples of a mismatch, a misalignment between product, between marketing messaging, between sales execution, and ultimately customer success, right? So if the deals that are being closed are not good deals because they churn quickly, or not good deals because professional services implementation teams are spending twice the time to get it working than they should. That's evidence that you don't have good product market fit in a way. Going back to some of the data, looking at the data points that could reflect some of those things as well. So I think a lot of it is intuitive observation, which I think your question surfaced the ability to see those disconnects, and then you find the data to prove your hypotheses.
Yeah,
great.
One other way to think about it as well is what are those points of conflict or differences of opinion where a decision is kind of a deep structural decision that if you choose one direction, you're probably committed to that for a couple of years. And what are the kind of decisions you can make where if you make that decision, you go down a path, you learn it's not the right one, you can relatively easily course correct and try to build that cadence and that trust amongst the decision makers by getting a few good decisions under your belt, recognizing what goes well, what doesn't, course correcting, if you can, if it's possible in the context of the business, before making some really deep structural decisions, where you need a lot of conviction before you do.
Great. Audrina, I saw your question come through the chat. We're just going to hold that because we had another one come through the Q&A, which is very similar. So to what extent do you see go-to-market ops as being compatible with capital A, agile and iterative approaches or not? Or does it depend?
The way I've thought about it in the past, and I can tell you some people on my team hated this, so you need the right DNA for it, is we would jump into the work without much of a plan in some instances, because we knew it was going to take too long to think it through and document everything and have a plan and be all, have it perfect. But we also knew that the mistakes we made weren't going to be critical. And actually the mistakes we made might be because we were, smart, hardworking, competent people, but there was lack of clarity somewhere. That there's probably lack of clarity for other people as well. So we would kind of use our own experience as a bit of a radar and a testing point for things we needed to fix on the fly and as we went. It was hard because we're constantly making mistakes, and people felt like they weren't making progress. But if you get used to that kind of, if I make a mistake, it's just I figured out somewhere where we need a bit more maturity in the business, as opposed to it's my mistake. In 3 to 6 months of that kind of agile approach, what we ended up finding is, okay, well, we've got all of this stuff where we put in some foundations, and we've kind of learned these are the structures, these are the process, these are the comms, these are the messaging, this is the stuff we're not going to tweak anymore because we've kind of consolidated that is a foundation building block we can build on. So I found you have to iterate between, okay, we're going to be agile in this domain, in this space, because it makes sense in that context. But over here, we're going to be much more rigorous, much more structured, longer term planning, and a little bit more traditional. And just be very, very aware of what tool or what technique is right for what situation. I think similar to what Christian was saying before, when sometimes you need generalists, sometimes you need specialists. And the art is in understanding where and how to mix those two.
Great. And what may be the final question as we're coming up to time from Audrina in the chat, what are some of the best examples and case studies that you've seen of go-to-market execution?
And I can speak to a couple of, and even in the examples that I gave earlier, in the kind of from the trenches, a lot of learnings, a lot of failures. And I think all case studies by default look good because they want to showcase the best stuff, and they don't point out the hard work that went into getting there. But some of the outcomes from both this kind of transformation and reconfiguration from 1 funnel to 5, we saw an increase in ACV. We saw shrinking sales cycles. We found other issues related to training and enablement, discovering new channels and finding out that certain ones were not quite ready to go. back to one of the other examples of a large publicly traded company where we had, basically rolled out this, new solution that was on the cusp in the beginning of, a digital transformation into the manufacturing space that laid the right groundwork, right? So looking back at that effort, it wasn't a success in the sense that we grew revenue 100% right afterwards, but it was a success in the sense that we built an institutionalized approach to bringing together these disparate products and forming in one solution. I know that's probably maybe a mouthful, but I'm trying to distill out what are some truly great examples.
Yeah,
Great.
The example that comes to mind. Example comes to mind for me. It's a hard one to summarize, I think, as it was for Christian. So I was working in a bank, and I was a client of a company called Artesian. And so I experienced them as a client, and they had unbelievable customer success function. I met with them once a quarter. They had all this data. They'd explain how we were using the solution. They would explain where we could use it better. They could explain, what the value was. They could show us and demonstrate with data what was working well. They then asked me about building something together. I gave them a slightly different perspective on it. We ended up working for about a year and a half, built a product together, and I could see how they joined up product and the customer intimately. Their CTO was intimately involved as well as their head of sales. After that, I worked with them as a consultant. After that, when I was in different business, we partnered on stuff. And the rigorous consistency in executing an underlying go-to-market playbook in terms of relationships, how they fostered, nurtured, took care of relationships was unbelievable. But then they were extremely adaptive to listen to what the market was asking for, what different types of clients needed, how the product was evolving. They're extremely adaptive on those things, but rigorous and relentless on relationship building, nurturing, end to end. So they're now called Full Circle. They ended up merging with their competitor, and the CEO took over, and they're now called Full Circle in the UK.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That's and Christian, that's an amazing example as well. And we're probably going to wrap up, as my question was the last. And I think, as with any operations and execution, it's especially when looking externally, it's very difficult to see the hard work that actually goes into any strategy that is being executed. It's great on strategy, but operations is always less visible. Thank you so much, Simon. I think you've moved to a new space, so I will hand over the mic for you to wrap up, if that's okay.
Absolutely. A little background change for the end here to spice things up. But thank everyone very much for attending. As we mentioned, the recording and the slides will be available to you all after. Big thanks to Jeff and Christian for preparing all of this, sharing all of their insights. If you want to leave some love in the chat on your way out, thank you so much for that. And to everyone else, we will catch you in the Ops Nation groups, whether that's in Slack or in person. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.